Today, if you are thirsty, you drink water. You do not expect someone to hand you beer with breakfast. But in ancient Egypt, that could be completely normal. Beer could be part of breakfast, part of your wages, part of religious offerings, and part of everyday survival. Which creates a strange question. Why would one of the greatest river civilizations in history drink so much beer when the Nile was flowing right beside them? And no, the answer is not simply that Egyptians thought all water was dangerous. They drank water too. And the real reason is hidden in the strange role beer played in how Egyptians worked, ate, and got paid. Imagine waking up in ancient Egypt. The sun is already burning through the walls. You have hours of hard work ahead. And before you leave, someone hands you a large clay jar. Not of water, beer. Not one glass, not a celebration. Beer was part of breakfast, part of wages, part of religious offerings, and part of survival. So why did one of the world's greatest river civilizations become obsessed with drinking fermented grain instead of the water flowing right beside them? The answer is not that Egyptians never drank water. They did. But in a world without pipes, filters, refrigerators, or germ theory, beer gave people something water often could not. A drink that came with food, energy, routine, and a little more certainty. And once you see what Egyptian beer was actually like, it starts to make perfect sense. Because this was not beer as we know it. It was closer to drinking lunch. Ancient Egypt survived because of the Nile. Every year the river flooded the fields, left behind dark fertile mud, and made farming possible in the middle of the desert. But the Nile was not a clean tap. People collected water from the river, from wells, and from storage jars. Some towns even had water carriers whose entire job was delivering water to homes. But water could be muddy, warm, stale, or contaminated depending on where it came from and how it was stored. And nobody knew why bad water made people sick. They only knew that sometimes it did. Beer was different. It began with the same thing that fed Egypt, grain. Workers harvested barley and emmer wheat. The grain was soaked, sprouted, dried, crushed, mixed with water, heated or cooked into a mash, then left to ferment. The exact recipes changed across thousands of years. Archaeologists are still debating the details, but the result was usually thick, cloudy, and full of grain. Modern beer is filtered. Ancient Egyptian beer probably was not. It would have looked more like a brown, nutritious porridge you could drink. And that was the point. Beer gave you calories. It gave you carbohydrates. It may have included traces of protein and vitamins from the grain and yeast. In a hot country where hard labor burned through energy, that mattered. A jar of beer was not just something to make the day more enjoyable. It was fuel. That is why bread and beer appear together everywhere in ancient Egypt. They were the two pillars of everyday life. If you were poor, you ate bread and drank beer. If you were a worker building on a royal project, bread and beer could be part of your ration. If you worked for a temple or a wealthy household, food and drink were often a form of payment. Ancient Egypt did not use coins the way we do today. A worker could be paid in things that kept his household alive. Grain, bread, beer. That means beer was not outside the economy. Beer was the economy. And this is where the story gets strange. The same drink used by laborers was also served to kings. It was offered to gods. It was placed in tombs for the dead. Egyptians believed that the afterlife required food and drink just like ordinary life. So tomb offerings repeatedly included the same essentials: bread, beer, oxen, and fowl. A wealthy person could take fine jewelry into the next world. But they still needed beer. Think about what that says. For us, beer is optional. It is a choice. For an Egyptian, beer could mean breakfast, payment, ceremony, hospitality, and the promise that you would not go hungry tomorrow. But was it really safer than water? Sometimes, probably. But the popular version of this story goes too far. It is tempting to say Egyptians drank beer because all water was deadly. That is not true. Egyptians absolutely drank water, stored water, carried water, and depended on water every day. And ancient beer was not magical disinfectant. It was often low in alcohol. It could still spoil. It could still be made badly. But making beer changed the water. The grain was processed. Parts of the mash were heated. Fermentation made the drink acidic and alcoholic. And beer was prepared through a familiar routine rather than scooped directly from whatever part of the river or canal happened to be closest. In some circumstances, that may have made it a safer alternative to questionable water, but even more important, it made the water useful. Beer turned grain and water into portable nutrition. You could carry it to a work site, you could ration it, you could store it, you could give it as wages, you could use it to support a household through a hard season, and you could drink it while doing exhausting labor under the Egyptian sun. There is even evidence of industrial-scale brewing from very early Egyptian history. At Abydos, archaeologists found a massive brewery dating to around 3000 BC. It was built to produce beer on a scale far beyond one family's kitchen. That means almost from the beginning of Egyptian civilization, beer was already organized, not improvised. Organized. Grain had to be grown, stored, milled, brewed, transported, distributed. Beer linked the farm to the palace, the temple to the worker, and the living to the dead, and it was everywhere. At home, beer was everyday nourishment. At work, it was a ration. At festivals, it became celebration. In temples, it became sacred. There was even a goddess connected to beer and drunkenness. Hathor, the goddess of love, music, beauty, and joy. That is how deeply beer sat inside Egyptian life. It was never just about getting drunk. It was about taking the most basic things in the world, grain and water, and turning them into something that could carry a civilization. So did ancient Egyptians choose beer over water? Not exactly. They chose beer because water alone was not enough. Water kept you alive. Beer helped feed you, pay you, celebrate with you, bury you, and get you through another brutal day beneath the desert sun. For ancient Egypt, beer was not an escape from life. It was part of how life worked.